I don't think that all INFJs have the trait of being passive aggressive. It's often mentioned in the literature and in the community that INFJs differ from some other types in maybe having a higher level of passive aggressiveness, and this is explained in various ways of being an FE user, but also, well, FE user is very important, but also an auxiliary FE user, so primarily an introvert, maybe trying to express their discontent in indirect ways and passive aggression, also requiring a certain level of psychological insight to know what makes people tick, and INFJs have psychological insight usually. So it's true that for all these reasons, one might expect that INFJs have the sin, if you like, and I mean this lightly, of course, of being passive aggressive, because it's really a very widespread phenomenon, and all of us are likely at one point or another in our lives, guilty of being passive aggressive, and I'm certainly no exception here. However, I do think that it's not really painting a very comprehensive picture of INFJs to just say INFJs tend to be passive aggressive, because I think passive aggressiveness tends to be a sin of the adaptive submissive INFJ, and this for very obvious reasons. The adaptive submissive INFJ, my first kind of subtype of INFJ, discussed in the Infinite Soul, which, by the way, you can guess my new book on the INFJ, on finding fulfillment, meaning, and purpose in a world that is really hostile to us in many ways. Ooh, it's full of sunshine here. You can get it. There's also need for more reviews of the book if you love the book, so please consider dropping a review if you enjoyed it on Amazon. Helps with the referencing. Anyway, so there's obviously a tripartite kind of subdivision of INFJs in the Infinite Soul between the adaptive submissive, the solipsist, and the spiritualized, also called the liberated INFJ. And I think that passive aggression is really a trait that you find more often in adaptive submissive INFJs. In fact, this speaks to a wider problem, which I'll address toward the end of the video. But if you like, since the adaptive INFJ is constantly spending their time trying to get on with other people, repressing their NI in order to fit with the rest, right? They just want to get on, and that's the way that they avoid the inevitable conflict of existence that they would otherwise experience between the demands of their NI and their NI world, inner world, and the external reality of things and events and people. They decide to sort of side with adaptation, and to some reasonably large extent, to repress their individuality. Since they do that, whenever they have to express discontent, because everyone expresses discontent or is annoyed or vexed or offended or whatever that might be, they're not really going to have the tools of direct confrontation, because their whole way of interacting with reality is through adaptive submissiveness, so they can't do that. So of course, whenever they do need to express something like this, they will tend to do it via passive aggression. The solipsist doesn't really do that. Solipsist is so self-contained that if they have a sin, instead of being avoidant and of not, maybe, in the extreme cases, maybe schizoid, but like not taking sort of people's points of view into account, and not enough anyway. So passive aggression, you wouldn't necessarily see that. And of course, in a liberated, spiritualized INFJ, you would expect to see more something like flow and contentment and well-being and serenity and beneficence. And the self-acceptance is so strong with these kinds of INFJs, rare kinds of INFJ, that passive aggression is something that wouldn't really occur to them. And so when I said earlier on in the video that this speaks to a wider problem, what I meant by this is that, and this is something that I discuss in the the Infinite Soul also, is that sometimes INFJs suffer from their reputation, and particularly from the way that people who are not INFJ compare what they read about INFJs, the mythological pictures of INFJs, the idealized pictures of INFJs, and then they compare them with real INFJs, and they tend to think, okay, like real INFJs are kind of pale copies of what they're supposed to be, and they're disappointing, and that can hurt INFJs who take this to heart, of course. And the fact of the matter is, there is a way in which you could read this as, in fact, a misreading by other people of adaptive submissive INFJs, who are the most common types of INFJs. And most INFJs go through a phase of being that way because it's easier and life is difficult. It's all about the growth and the dynamism of how you're directed toward higher stages, like, you know, solipsism and ultimately liberation. But, you know, people tend to look at adaptive submissive INFJs and they think that's the whole sample of INFJs. And of course, then they might think that this doesn't compare too well with the mythological description. So there's an issue with the description, which is too mythological. So of course, no one can actually measure up to that kind of description in the first place. But also there is this, if you like, parallel issue of using as your sample the majority of INFJs who are adaptive submissive, in fact, not living the truth of their NI function. And so the two together leads to that discrepancy. So again, you know, like the being an INFJ is not an easy thing to do. This is not about guilting adaptive submissive INFJs. In fact, I think that it's possible that maybe we are all still that at certain moments of the day or the week, because sometimes the confrontation of the demands of the inner world with those of external reality, sometimes it's too intense. You know, sometimes it's too intense. But I just wanted to offer this clarification, because passive aggression can happen with INFJs, but not necessarily all INFJs, or not at all stages of an INFJ life. Okay. You can get this book, by the way, INFJ Life in the Modern World, The Infinite Soul, recently out of the oven. You can get at the links below on finding purpose, meaning, and everything else in the world, this hostile world. The Ecstatic Soul is still available, you know, which is its prequel, as you can see. This is an in-depth look at the INFJ mind consciousness and its existential manifestations. There's important concepts in this book that I use in that book. You can still read that book independently, but it's good to read both, you know, just a suggestion. And don't forget that the lifeblood of my channel is Patreon and donations. I need those to keep going. I'm very grateful to my old and new supporters. And don't forget, you can interact with me there. You can ask me questions. You can make suggestions for new content, because I need new ideas. And I do some, you know, I share some content, like I do some Jung excerpts, you know, discussing some excerpts from the Jung bibliography and things like that. So there's also that benefit. But mostly it is to support me and my channel. Thank you for considering it. And I will talk to you next time, guys. Bye-bye.